Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today on 10 e-commerce tech trends that are reshaping retail in 2022 and beyond with Ryan Bartley, co-founder and chief strategy officer at Fabric. As a reminder, if you have any questions during the conversation, to please use the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen. We encourage everyone to participate and make this an interactive and educational session. With that said, I'd like to pass it over to our host, Deborah Weinswig, CEO and founder of Coresight Research.
Thanks, Stephen, and Ryan, great to be here with you today. For those of you who don't know Fabric, the company was born from a desire to really democratize commerce by giving every business access to really best-in-class technologies that are traditionally only held by kind of large organizations, and to really make the future of commerce better, which is what we're going to talk about today. And as we learn more, and discuss kind of this idea about flexible and headless e-commerce platforms, Fabric is really, I would say, kind of on the cutting edge of much of what we're hearing and seeing these days, and certainly have gotten a lot of inquiries from those of you who are joining us today. And so, as we've seen e-commerce accelerate since really March of 20, and kind of 2 years later, not only kind of the growth rate, but the categories where we're seeing some of the greatest growth, shoppers have continued to shift their spending online, and they've continued to shop offline as well. But what we're starting to see now is really this idea around kind of changing consumer preferences, and as brands and retailers are trying to be more proactive, there is a huge opportunity, and that's what we wanted to kind of discuss today. And so I want to get started here as we kind of look at like how things have changed over this kind of 3-year time frame. There's been a lot of simplification and automation of e-commerce operations, and those are some of the two primary themes we expect to see this year. As we look at kind of Fabric's digital commerce platform and how it can help e-commerce retailers really like simplify technology by, I look at it as like this decoupling of like front end and back end. And so when you think about it from an e-commerce operations perspective, we're seeing kind of greater agility. And so it's enabling retailers to take a proactive approach, and what, I think that we all agree is a very fast changing environment today. And especially as we're starting to see inflation creep up and starting to see changes in consumer preferences, it's even, in my opinion, more important than ever. And as we're starting to see this kind of collection of data from disparate sources, there's this whole idea around further optimizing digital experiences for shoppers, while leveraging advanced analytics, kind of really, an e-commerce solutions dream. And especially in the organization, as you start to kind of look at the data and try to make decisions, really, I think, quite critical. And so, Ryan, as we look at these kind of 3 key themes around agility, flexibility, and adaptability this year, how do you expect these to shape overall, kind of the e-commerce landscape?
Yeah, well, Deborah, thank you for having me here. And, I'm glad you put the timeline for the last couple of years on here, because it's been quite a blur, I'm sure, for everybody. And one kind of macro view of this is, predictability around the world, and of world events, of changing landscape of obviously our health landscape, and all other kind of events have reduced predictability, which means that to combat that or rise above that, companies need to move quicker, and I think they need to do that through both the software that's enabling their core commerce engine and the rest of their business, but also through their operations. And so as we think about, being adaptable to these new and different customers who frankly have just come online from an e-commerce perspective through COVID, it's really important that companies move quick. In fact, our general manager of our marketplace business just slapped me this morning and said, quick always wins over big. And so I think for the teams out there that are working day to day, either in a retailer or a B2B company, or as a partner of those, if you're an agency or a systems integrator, you have to really be thinking about speed and agility.
It's interesting, Ryan, in the early part of the pandemic, really kind of March of 20, we had, kind of come together with a few others to start a philanthropic organization called Retailers United. Mm-hmm. And while the mission kind of shifted along the way, at this point now that, so much else is kind of, retailers and, kind of the healthcare system have enough access to PPE and whatnot. And so we turned to really help retailers, and many of them kind of, as you suggested, they were, growing quickly, but either had a physical presence or their kind of online presence wasn't robust enough. And so we started to go in and, really got, hands-on experience as to like what their challenges were. And so that's why it's like really interesting. And I think especially at that time, quick was really important because we had to kind of get them onto a platform that worked and that they were able to, understand their inventory and kind of fulfillment and whatnot. And so, kind of coming from that perspective, how do you think these kind of small and like mid-sized e-commerce players are positioned versus these large e-commerce retailers to really, think about market share this year?
Well, I think, there's obviously some headwinds, especially with the direct-to-consumer organizations, especially with kind of the approach that has worked over the past few years, which is, put $1 into social media marketing and get $3 out of it. I think that kind of game is up. And so that headwind has to be, kind of rethought of how you go to market and how you start to build not a consumer. And, we call that whole industry direct to consumer. And I think those companies, if they're smart, they'll continue to build brands and they have great products, but you have to start thinking of direct to community and building up your community. So I think there's some core themes that we have to look at of how to start to transition from, just a machine that's really good at advertising and marketing to a machine that's really built around building a brand following and building a community.
I think that that's actually really important. I don't think I just want to really share with you. I don't know if I've heard this idea around like direct to community. I think that that's incredibly meaningful, especially right now is right. Consumers are trying to identify. I mean, we see that a lot in like the live streaming space, right? And I think that that's very important because consumers want to feel like they have a one-to-one relationship, or even if it's like a one-to-many that, right, the retailer brand knows them. So I think that that's actually more important than at first blush what we might all think. And so I think as we kind of take a snapshot of these like 10 US e-commerce tech trends on the next slide, it'll give you kind of an idea of, the journey we're going to be on today. And we'll kind of, rapid fire questions to Ryan as we go through this. But I think as we look at kind of number one on the next slide, right, this whole idea around the changing e-commerce landscape. And, you talked a little bit about this idea around kind of social commerce and, maybe the model that's always worked, like the $1, $3 isn't necessarily what's going to work in the future. And so for a retailer, Ryan, what do you believe are the key technology components to focus on when trying to improve like the overall social e-commerce experience?
Well, first off, I think, there's been a lot of experimentation in social commerce, and I still think the best days are ahead for social commerce. But what I would encourage everybody to think of is really look and expand your view outside of, the North America market. There's tremendous work that's happening in Asia Pacific, in Europe, and I would specifically talk about Asia Pacific and kind of the models that are working well. I think, as I look at e-commerce around the world, I think, they're 5 to 10 years ahead of the North American market in terms of thinking and in terms of experiences. So one opportunity to start to lean into this year would absolutely be live streaming and live shopping as well, Deborah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I feel like, we've been on a mission from a knowledge and education standpoint around live streaming. I've seen it firsthand in China in terms of the impact it can have on the consumer. And, as we think about sustainability, I always, like to think about the profitability opportunity, right? Because to me, if you're spending more to be sustainable, I don't know if that actually is by definition not sustainable. But right, with live streaming, we see a significant decrease, at least 50% in returns right? Because of that, not only just the power of the community, but even like the one-to-one with whether it's a key opinion leader, a KOC, key opinion customer, influencer, creator, whoever is on kind of like the other side, the host or co-host, right? As you're engaging with them and they are providing feedback on, oh, maybe that's, maybe you should buy this top with this bottom, or, other people who have your skin type have tried this with success. And so what we see is a more engaged consumer, a happier consumer, right? And ultimately more profitable because we see that decrease in returns. And then when you start to add in like the gamification layer, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you're, 3 people will win, or if you're on for the whole time, right? Like there's these like 8-hour like live streaming marathons, right? And so I think you start to add this goes back to where I think from, like the metaverse and live stream, right? It starts to be more 3D, right? As opposed to like where e-commerce is very 2D. And so what we're finding is that when you can then embed that live stream into your website, not only are you bringing in new customers, but you're creating like an entirely new experience. I don't know what you've seen.
Yeah, some of the leading brands that are, joining Fabric and coming off Fabric's platforms are absolutely adding this component. And I think it just builds a deeper connection. Obviously, we haven't been able to connect as humans in person for the past couple of years. And traditionally, like you said, e-commerce was really 2D. It's kind of a flat surface where you go and you do your thing individually. Now, what you're seeing is the technology is catching up where you can have more of that personal experience, that relationship with the brand, where you can actually talk to the person that's sitting in the retail location who's an expert in your products and services. And so I think, there's no longer a technology gap here. It's really about the brands curating and thinking about that service level and that experience that they want to give customers that is beyond, that flat 2D surface. So highly encourage everybody to start to work in this direction.
And then as we move to kind of number 2, another passion point is in loyalty. And I do think that, right, everybody rethought kind of loyalty programs, especially early on in kind of 2020. And I think really realized just how beneficial they've been, and whether it's like driving consumer engagement or revenues or shopper retention, access to data. But what we've seen is this idea that they're not only important for attracting, but also retaining. And right, I think, we've heard so much around, right, customer lifetime value and thinking about customer acquisition costs and whatnot. Like loyalty really does play a big role there. And not only, right, creating a rewards or even like gamification for online, but also for, kind of those consumers who are shopping both in the physical and the virtual world. And, this whole idea around what they can offer to those kind of loyal customers. And, I think there's some great, examples around kind of like Walmart and Cashback Company bought a partner in like 2021. And this agreement included, Walmart joining, right, like the Ibotta Performance Network. And, it's a digital network which enables delivery of cash rebates across third-party sites, including social media networks. That's just like one quick example. I'm sure between the two of us, Ryan, we've come up with many others. But this whole idea around kind of, I do this, and I do this because it's like consistent with my values, and then I get rewarded for this, and then I can find this like whole community, right? If we're like on like numbers 1 and 2. And I think that as we, kind of saw this kind of, I don't even know if like receding is, but just we saw a change in terms of customer loyalty. Some of it was around, right, the customers weren't available on shelves because of challenges in the supply chain. So they were very open to trying new products and brands, and even like private label, right? We saw a complete change in terms of, the dynamics there. How do you think brands and retailers can work on kind of, a truly omni-channel and seamless loyalty program?
Well, first off, I think, the core principle here is the best customer is the one that you already have. They've already shown engagement, and you can build that lifetime value versus, chasing that next customer and driving up your, CAC costs and other costs in marketing. And so what's fun, Deborah, is at Fabric, we have a configurable loyalty platform. We call it Member. And we've just seen an explosion of demand for that product. And what's fun about it, what's interesting, and what I would encourage everybody to think about is what does loyalty mean to you and what experience you want to drive? So don't start with the software and, don't start with kind of the end state of where you want to be. I would highly encourage everybody to reach out to your partnership community, the agencies that are really deeply embedded in thinking about what is your value proposition and what is your experience that you want to offer that would provide a loyal customer. And that we built a configurable loyalty platform because there is a lot of folks who are very creative in this industry, thinking about how they position their brand and at what service level and what experience they want to provide. And that can run the gamut from, subscription-based models to membership-based models to points-based models to, early access to products and services. The list goes on and on and on in terms of what that value proposition is to the customer in terms of being loyal, right? And so with that, I would say start with the strategy and then work back to the execution arm of how you actually up-level that experience for your customers, your best customers.
That's really helpful. And then there's been a lot of, kind of conversation around, right, simplifying e-commerce processes using, headless. Do you think it can improve like overall data collection and usage practices? What are we not thinking about?
Yeah, I think the leading companies that we're working with are really doubling down or tripling down on data, on first-party and third-party data, to be able to capture that understanding of the customer and the behavior. I always encourage folks to, invest in data analysts and folks who can make sense of the overwhelming kind of flood of information that you're going to get from several different signals. And what's important is you start to rationalize all that data and make insights on it so you can best serve your customer. So with that, the loyalty programs and the loyalty software that you can now use gives you great insights. The best data fidelity is a digital customer, right? However, you have to track that customer across all of their touch points with their brand, right? They don't see you as different channels, retail, online, and we've been talking about this for 10 plus years, I think, in the e-commerce business. But now, because you can get those touch points in store and online and digitize them at the point of sale or digitize them when you're talking to somebody in the store and track that person across your own kind of services and experiences online, that way you can start to meld together all of this information and see a full picture of your customer and start to cohort or segment those customers into the right kind of communities that you can drive this higher level loyalty experience with. So highly, highly encourage everybody to, think about data. And it's not just about collecting data, but it's about driving the insights and the actions outside of that.
That's, I think, really, really critical right now, especially. And so as we look at kind of the third trend, I love this idea around like the need for speed is, kind of quick over big, however you want to kind of phrase it. But
yeah.
We've spent a lot of time in, I'd say the past 6 months, really, maybe a little bit longer, but since kind of mid-21, living in Manhattan, and you'd have to, as you stepped out onto the street, you had to look both ways to make sure that there wasn't somebody who was kind of doing one of these 15 or 20-minute deliveries, because right, we've seen that absolutely kind of grow at like breakneck speed. And what we're seeing is this kind of instant needs, quick commerce, instant commerce market, however you want to phrase it, kind of was approximately, by our estimates from a Coresight perspective, about $25 billion last year. And that's like 13% of online CPG. It's pretty significant. And going back to the data that we're seeing from that, I think is also changing where a lot of CPG companies are even spending, right? And so, as shoppers are expecting products faster than ever, what do you believe will be the key focus area for e-commerce and making, kind of the end-to-end order fulfillment process quicker? Because I think that, for good reasons, we all have less patience than we used to. And so I do think expectations have increased significantly. And what does that mean for, e-commerce?
Well, first off, there's obviously been an explosion in kind of R&D that's funded by venture capital in a lot of these, quick commerce companies that are delivering within a half hour, and they're delivering commodity goods. I think that's a hard game, and there's going to be lots of costs and lots of R&D happening in that. But I would say if you're an established or growing brand or retailer, retail is ultimately logistics. You have a product and a customer, and you need to get that product as close as possible to that customer. And so really investing all the way up front in terms of your demand generation, in terms of your inventory profiles and where that inventory sits, and then thinking about how best to get it to that customer, utilizing your store network to pick, pack, and ship, utilizing your employees or third-party companies who do that last mile are really, really important to think through. And as you do that, it's important to think about kind of the unit economic costs of this. Not every customer needs every item within 30 minutes, right? But maybe a commodity good that, you've ran out of. However, if you're an apparel retailer or, if you're selling hard goods or any other kind of product that people don't need immediate gratification with, I think there's opportunities to get to the product to the customer at the right time in the right place when they want it, right? As an example, I paused all my orders for e-commerce this week because I'm leaving on Friday to go on vacation. I would love for some of those things to show up at my vacation spot, but I am very concerned about that, mid-mile and last mile experience if it can actually meet me where I'm at. And so you have to think through both the operational bits of that and the technology bits of that. One quick consideration for Fabric is we have an order management platform that's highly robust, enterprise-grade order management platform that's being deployed to very large retailers with thousands of stores. And they're utilizing our order management system to optimize that fulfillment consideration. So instead of fulfilling from your warehouse that may be in Columbus, Ohio, why not fulfill it from the store that's right around the corner? There's lots of kind of data crunching and considerations to put into that logic because you obviously want to support your offline or your retail store customers well and not kind of sell out your store. And so there's a lot of intelligence that needs to be built into these platforms and a lot of automation so you get the right product at the right place at the right time.
Well, there's something even more, as you were talking, right? If you think about it, right, from a real estate perspective, ironically, right, retail real estate is less expensive than industrial. And
yes.
In a retail location, right, product can go out the front, and by going out the back, I mean, right, it's all going out the front technically, but out the back, right, meaning more kind of to fulfill e-commerce or whatnot. And so if you think about the fact that you now have these kind of like multiple uses of your physical location, which is actually why I think the retailers after we saw pretty significant closings in 2020, there was this epiphany, which is why we've seen, we had, I think, openings slightly outpaced closings last year, and we believe that will be even greater this year because of exactly what you just brought up. And I think this idea around like an OMS system to kind of really help you, right, optimize where your inventory is, and especially if you have anything perishable, right? And things can be perishable in more ways than just food and beverage, right? I mean, you can have something that's very fast fashion and whatnot. And so I actually think that this is a really critical point, and one that we're seeing, I would say, certainly from a real estate perspective, has become increasingly important, and I think will be a key kind of topic this year as everyone thinks about how they're investing and where. And so I think as we kind of move to number 4, and this idea around like process automation is really critical to I think process automation is critical to just success in general. And I'm sure, Ryan, you think about this a lot, but, because in some ways, right, the less that you can have to like make decisions, and the more that, right, as long as it's kind of like tried and true, that the, retailers are, I don't know, I thought about this over the weekend. I'm like, retail is so incredibly complex because, you know, and it's like why the C-suite is like, you know, kind of tripled over the past few years, because now you have to have, right, a chief innovation officer, a chief e-commerce officer, a chief digital officer, a CIO, right, chief sustainability officer, chief supply chain, right? It's just, it's chief logistics, right? It's incredibly complex. And so the more that can be automated, right, you know, you can bring all these people together to make, you know, kind of really, you know, tough decisions around, you know, kind of changes in business processes, procedures, landscape. How do you think retailers should approach automation to maximize returns? And just as, you know, you're looking at the landscape, where have you seen some of the, I'd say the greatest ROI as they are automating?
Yeah, great question, Deborah. And, you know, this is one of the founding principles of Fabric, is really to provide the advanced tool set to the rest of the retail and the rest of the B2B community, and to anybody who's, you know, growing from a small business to a mid-market or enterprise company needs the same level of tooling and capabilities as what you would see if you went inside of Amazon's retail operations or Alibaba's retail operations. Right, there's a tremendous amount of automation that's within these large companies who can spend billions of dollars of R&D. And what's great about it is you want to be able to be in a place where you're really optimizing or automating for the low level things that, you know, merchants and marketers are doing today, and inventory planners and site operators are doing. So I would say, you know, there's not a bad place to start in your automation. Where I'm seeing the biggest bang for the buck is, you know, at that order fulfillment and order lifecycle processing, as well as setting up the right kind of automation around just the inventory flow, and also the pricing and the promotional flow as well too, versus kind of that old school retail mentality of reacting to the market. You should be setting your business goals and letting the algorithms and the software optimize to those business goals. So it's a different mindset, and you have to really change the role of what it means to be a merchant online, or what it means to be a marketer online, as you start to use this new advanced tool set that's available.
I think those are definitely kind of words of wisdom. And as we move to kind of like number 5, this idea around kind of, I think, headless commerce really, I mean, I love the word unify, because, right, that's I think what we all want right now, but like unifying these shopper experiences, and, you know, as we see them in kind of several different channels, and, you know, this kind of often heard phrase, and I think, you know, we've had people ask us exactly what it means. And I honestly, probably the first time I heard it, I, you know, went and did some research around it, but this idea that like headless is decoupling the front end and the back end, right? I mean, that can mean many things to many different people, but how would you best explain that to, you know, executives we're talking to all the time that don't have, right, a deep tech background? And even if you do, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, headless is, you know, really an architecture principle, like you said, just separating the front end and the back end. And what I think of is, it's very simple. Traditionally, the software in the commerce market was built to, in one and all package, to do everything, and it was all pretty much the same kind of technologies and approach. However, now today, what you can do with headless is you get purpose-built software. The software that's, you know, building your lightning fast front-end experience and your brand experience that your customers expect in, you know, sub 1 second on a mobile device without Wi-Fi, versus crunching your loyalty data in the background with, you know, petabytes worth of data or terabytes worth of data. That needs to be differentiated from a technology perspective. And so that's ultimately what headless does, is give you purpose-built software that works together because it's built on modern software principles around transitioning data back and forth between these purpose-built modules. So at Fabric, we effectively have built a full suite of commerce products that work beautifully together. However, they're also modular, meaning if you already have an investment that's working for you, and, has got you to a place that you want to keep that investment, great, keep that module, plug in Fabric's other modules, and you can make considerable speed and considerable progress on your business goals versus worrying about all of this kind of technology mess around these long, old school replatforming projects that take years and millions of dollars. You no longer need to do that. You can make that incremental progress because of now the technology architecture that exists today.
I have to say, back when I was on Wall Street, anytime you saw these companies replatforming, you were like, I probably need to pull like my buy rating off of that because we just know how this is going to and it always went the same way every time. So it was always like kind of, I guess, almost like the definition of insanity, right? You somehow think you're going to do it and it's going to have a different outcome for you. I just didn't work. And, as we think about these modules, can you just double click on that a little bit in terms of how that breaks down or some of the modules that we should think about?
Sure. Fabric, we have a full suite of commerce capabilities. We start with kind of the front-end brand experience. We have a headless CMS page builder we call Experience Manager, and it allows a marketer to create landing pages, home pages, effectively merchandise your site without your developers, right? If I want to change something or build a new landing page, I don't want to call a developer. And we have a lightning fast storefront product as well too. So you can build your own brand experience, not a theme out of the box that you got to hire an army developers to manage. Then as we think about the merchant and the marketing team who's running commerce day to day across your channels, we have a full suite of applications that allow a marketer and a merchant to onboard products and not own inventory or own inventory with our marketplace product. They're able to enrich those products in our PIM or product information master. They're able to price those and set the right kind of pricing and promotional structure with a product we call offers. And then it flows all the way through order management and loyalty management as well too. So end to end, if you sum all that up, it's a full suite of products to manage your day-to-day operations, to automate kind of your low-level needs, and then up-level yourself so you have the same kind of tool set that an Amazon or Alibaba would have, and the flexibility to choose from an ecosystem of partners. So if you have a unique need, or if you have a product or service that's outside of kind of Fabric's four walls, we work nicely with it. And we're probably partners with those leading companies as well too.
That's fantastic and actually very helpful. And then, as we kind of look at, our going back to like where we started, this idea around like these three key themes for this year, right? Agility, flexibility, adaptability, I think in our personal and our professional lives, which we discussed at the beginning. Where do you think, kind of headless is placed in helping retailers kind of succeed across those themes? And, just what other advice do you have for retailers to think about, as they're, we're still early on in the year as they look ahead?
Yeah, I would encourage everybody to, take a step back and say, what is my core problem or opportunity that I need to solve for right now? And that will, produce business outcomes, meaning sustainable, revenue growth and sustainable bottom line growth. And think about what your customer, what impacts you can make to your customer. Some brands we're seeing, especially direct to consumers that are scaling, are thinking about how do I build a brand destination? And so you can start with your front end platform. Rebuild your front end platform to have a lightning fast branded experience that's unique to your brand, and connect with whatever you have that's working today, right? Other companies, after you scale, you need to think about your product selection and expanding your product selection. And so think about, how do I do that in a low cost, fast way with marketplace so I don't have to own that inventory, and or adding product enrichment so you have the best kind of product content in your platform. And then last but not least is, how do you think about your order fulfillment and order management process? Am I fulfilling in the right kind of reasonable manner across my retail and online network as well too? So we call that the 3 pillars of pain at Fabric. And I
love that.
I would encourage everybody to find your pillar of pain or find your pillar of opportunity and work on that, as opposed to trying to boil the ocean, because agility and speed is really important. Break down that problem space and go after that core problem you have.
No, I really like that. And, as we kind of look at the key insights here, I think that, these are some of the topics we discussed. But actually, as we were talking, Ryan, I took some notes. If you notice me just kind of looking to the side. So I'm going to go through just, ad hoc, what did I learn today? And so I love the idea of like quick over big, direct to community. First time I'd heard that. The best customer, yeah. And the best customer is the one you have, but I do feel like there's always this like search that, when you talk to retailers that, there is kind of this wandering eye almost, as opposed to kind of, staying focused at home. And then I thought this was interesting, right? Investing in data analysts to understand signals. Retailers have more data than anyone can know what to do with. And so there's a lot they're telling you, right, about going back to this customer you have and also the macro environment as well. And, kind of how do those two kind of fit hand in glove? I also love this phrase. You said like retail is ultimately logistics, right? And I couldn't agree with you more. And then this idea around, right, investing in not just, kind of upfront inventory positioning, but also around the technology that helps you think about that. This idea around kind of like, OMS, order management systems, optimizing fulfillment and, kind of doing a lot of data crunching around that. I also wrote down like automate whatever you can to focus. And once again, I think that's like a personal and a professional life, right? The more that can automatically happen, right? The more that we can focus on, what I think you summed it up with, which is like these 3 pillars of pain. And for retailers, right, really focusing on what is my core problem or opportunity, because I think that will, like, once you boil that down, that will ultimately kind of, help you, as you look ahead. So, Ryan, those were just some of like, what I learned from our conversation today. As we kind of come to a conclusion, I know we still have 5 of these to talk about. As you're looking ahead to 22, which I think will continue to be a challenging year from a supply chain perspective, we'll have some, macro headwinds with inflation and other, I would say, kind of, macroeconomic, challenges. How, as you're sitting down and kind of, having conversations with retail executives, what are you finding kind of the tone, and also what are you finding just kind of the biggest challenge?
Yeah, I would say, obviously the past couple of years have been high growth for especially digital or e-commerce, and companies have had to frankly catch up very quickly in terms of just, building capabilities. Now with the macro economic factors that we're seeing with supply chain costs, with inflation, we're starting to see a balance from companies thinking not just about growth, but about how do I grow sustainably? How do I compete against these headwinds that are happening when, my costs are going up? Do I pass it along to the customer? And there's a large concern about, unit economics. And so I would say this year, you really have to balance that. And one of the key themes to doing that, to balance that is to build sustainable and profitable growth over time, you have to be highly efficient. And so automating away kind of the waste that you have today is extremely important. And then also, you still have to up-level your service level and your brand experience to serve that customer who now expects much more out of you. So you have to juggle these two conflicting items, and I think you should make it an and, where you are improving your service level and your loyalty experience, and you're highly optimizing and automating away any cost that you have, so you continue to grow profitably. And what I think is a really exciting market for companies who are thinking about, not just the next few months, but the next years ahead of e-commerce and digital growth.
That's great. And we have a lot of questions in the queue, which I think we'll get to kind of 1 or 2 since we're a little over time as it is already. But I did want to address this question that Susan had, which is, what structures need to be in place to achieve a quick commerce model?
Well, I think, ultimately, you have to kind of consider your fulfillment approach. Do you use your own inventory, and where does that inventory sit? And then 2, do you use things like drop shipping or marketplace to augment your product selection without owning the risk of sitting on that inventory. So that's one part of it, is where do I put stuff? The second is the partnerships of how you think about delivering this in the last mile. And obviously there's lots of investment within that space. There's companies kind of growing every day and popping up in specific markets. So I think you need to start to be thoughtful about what kind of relationships you build with the folks who are actually on the ground, bringing those products to your consumers, and what experience do you want. So building those partnerships and really testing those out in your high density markets, I think is where you should probably focus your effort, as opposed to, again, trying to boil the ocean with the whole kind of geographic expanse that you may think that you need to cover. Focus on those core markets where you can get that density.
Great. I'm going to ask this one last question. Again, apologize for not getting to all of them, but I do think that as we're seeing retailers increasingly interested in live streaming this year, the question is, what is the role of headless commerce and live streaming?
Well, the beauty of headless commerce is really that you can connect or compose any kind of solution together. And at Fabric, we think a lot about that orchestration and composition. And so the most leading companies that are joining Fabric are plugging in these best of breed capabilities that are not traditional e-commerce, but innovative, like social commerce. How do I live stream to a customer right now on my site, with high quality and high bandwidth? There's startups and there's companies that Fabric's partnering with that can do that. So you can kind of test and expand your experiences, because you can pick and choose and curate your set of software that has to work together. And so that's really, I think, encouraging from a technology perspective. Is it's no longer an IT project. It's no longer months of work to add on this new business model or new capability, to try it out. And so that's what I would encourage you to think about, is from a headless perspective, it allows you to orchestrate many different companies and many different solutions together to give you, your customer, a seamless new experience that hopefully is innovative to your company.
Great. Well, I think that we just scratched the surface here, and I really think this is quite inspirational for retailers, both kind of big and small, because there's this idea that there is this, kind of really this, kind of whole solution suite, and it's not, a 3-year project. It's something that if they've got a pain point, they can take care of right away, and that's something that we've always, right, like, kind of swat at the flies that are, kind of there, and then I think we can kind of move on. So Ryan, thank you for sharing your insights and your wisdom, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you, Deborah.
Take care. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.